Gosh, I wish I had more time. How often have you and I said that? I wish I had more time. You know, if I had more time, I would do this, I would do that, I would do this, and so the list goes on. I wish I had more time. Well, my friends, our wish came true yesterday. We were given an extra day this year called leap year. You and I were gifted with 24 extra hours. So, your wish has been granted. I hope you used that time well. I hope you used that 24 hours yesterday to do all those things that you wish you had more time for. You know, like reading, like visiting people, like calling people on the phone, you know, those kinds of things. I'm sure you did plenty of that. If not, well, there's always a new day. Today, as a matter of fact, known as March 1st, which is not only a date on the calendar, but on this, the first Sunday of Lent, it is an order that is given to you and I to March 1st. Where are we marching to? We're marching right into the garden. And if you don't like gardens, we can march into the desert. We're given both places on this first Sunday of Lent to spend some time dwelling in. So March 1st. Don't worry about overthinking it. Don't worry about overanalyzing it. Just simply march into the garden. A few years ago, I was at my favorite place in the city of Willmar, other than, of course, here at church. And that favorite place was selling its usual flowers and shrubs and perennials and trees. In addition to that, they were selling t-shirts. And the t-shirt quite simply read this: remember, it all began in the garden. Remember, it all began in the garden. So we're reminded of that today in today's first reading from the book of Genesis. It all began in the garden. What began in the garden? Well, God began in the garden. What began in the garden? Creation began in the garden. What began in the garden? Humanity began in the garden. It all began in the garden, including temptation. That began in the garden as well. So we find ourselves marching first into the garden with Adam and Eve, and there we find ourselves desiring exactly what Adam and Eve desired. Their desire, what it is that they wanted, and that which the serpent was encouraging them to grab a hold of and to hold on to and to eat and to partake in, was a good thing. What did Adam and Eve want? Wisdom. They wanted wisdom. The ability to have their eyes opened so that they could differentiate the difference between good and evil. And the book of Genesis today tells us that this gift of wisdom is desirable. So why did it become such a grave sin that it became our original sin? Why was it that God was so offended that Adam and Eve would want something as good as wisdom? Well, because Adam and Eve were desiring wisdom without a relationship with God. They were looking for wisdom without having a relationship with God, who makes wisdom good. Put another way, my friends, it's quite simply this. If you remember nothing else about my homily today, please remember this: love the gardener more than the fruit. Love the gardener more than the fruit. Because you see, that was the sin of Adam and Eve. They were loving the fruit and what it might afford and offer to them. Wisdom so that they could be like gods. That's what they wanted. Without even realizing it, it is then that their eyes were opened. They realized that they were naked, that they were now vulnerable because of the fact that they had chosen a path that was leading them in a direction that did not have a love for the gardener. They had forgotten about the gardener. And so because of that, they found themselves naked. So too, the temptations are found in the desert today. And so while we have the complete opposites, a garden that is lush, that is green, that has life, that has food in it, well, now we go to the desert, and there we have barrenness, and we have nothingness, and we have hunger, and of course that which is similar to both these places that you and I are invited to dwell in during the season of Lent is that you can find temptations at work in both places. In the fruits and in the enjoyments of this life, as well as in the barrenness and the hungers that you and I have. It is there that indeed the serpent continues to work and to find a way in which he can invite you and I to go down a path that forgets the gardener, that forgets who we are. How did he have the strength after 40 days of fasting in the desert? How was he able to say to Satan after the third temptation, "Get away, get out of here"? How did he have the strength to do that? Well, my friends, he had a relationship with the gardener. He had spent 40 days in that desert, and for 40 days, he reflected on his own identity. He remembered those words spoken as he came out of the Jordan River, as the dove descended. Jesus spent 40 days thinking about, what does it mean when I hear God say, "You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased"? So Jesus would spend those 40 days, and he would think about that identity and what that identity then was calling him to be and calling him to do. And because of that identity, he was able to say to Satan, "No thanks, get away." You see, that's when you and I get into trouble, when we forget who we are. We think we know who we are, and oftentimes the temptation is inviting you and I to become somebody other than who we are. And because of that, why then we give in to the temptations of this life, whether we find ourselves in the garden or in the desert. But if we can just remember, as Jesus did, who we are, sons and daughters of God with whom God is well pleased, well then we then spend these 40 days of Lent recognizing that ultimately we are given these incredible fruits called prayer and fasting and almsgiving. But remember, friends, as we are entering into these disciplines of Lent, love the gardener more than the fruit. Why do we pray? Not just simply so that we can say we did it, or that we accomplished it, or that we spent and we were dedicated and disciplined enough during these 40 days to make sure we prayed every day, and so we can check that off as a box, but rather we pray to what? So that we might come to know the gardener. And in order to know the gardener, that means, my friends, when we pray, sometimes we have to be quiet. We have to stop talking. We have to listen to the voice of God speaking in the depths of our heart. Why do we fast? Why do we abstain from meat on Fridays? Why do we give alms? Not just so that we can become a better person and we can lose a little bit of weight and we can say that we accomplished every Friday. We didn't eat any meat and we were really good Catholics because of that. Why do we do all this, my friends? So that we can love the gardener. And we will find the gardener in the poor. That's why we fast. That's why we abstain from meat. That's why we give alms, so that we might come to see Christ in the poor, in those people who by no choice of their own have to fast every day, who have to abstain every day because they don't have what you and I have been afforded every day. So we love the gardener more than the fruit. And if we can stay focused on that during these 40 days, why then we will find ourselves, yes, in the garden where it all began. And sometimes in the desert where we find ourselves spiritually along this journey of life. But wherever we find ourselves, wherever we dwell these days, there will be temptations. And you and I will have the strength to say no. Why? Because we love the gardener more than the fruits.